which is really annoying for me. Or not annoying, I shouldn't say annoying, it's tedious. I'm actually feeling much better about this today. And I think that it's gonna be so cute. So I am off on another adventure of creating my own sweater pattern. I was doing like a little bit of a route through my yarn supply. It is such a mess up there. I really need to do like a full-on organization of it, but I found this yarn, which has been in my collection since 2019, I think. I'm pretty sure that my husband got me this for Christmas 2019. I have 5 balls of Wool in the Gang's Shiny Happy Cotton in the shade Lipstick Red. And I have been hanging on to this for years because it is so red. It is like the reddest red, and I've just like not known what to do with it. But I found this yarn in my collection and I had an idea to do like a super sporty V-neck sweater. I feel like for me at least, a sweater in this kind of color it just feels like such a sporty color. It's not like a color that I would wear on any given random day. So it is February 8th today. I could like push myself and try to like design and knit an entire sweater before Valentine's Day, but realistically with work, that's simply not going to happen. But I'm gonna try to knit this sweater by the end of the month. This is a pretty thick yarn. I have used it before on my white Chika sweater. It can knit up at like a loose-ish gauge and knits up pretty quickly. So I'm pretty sure I can knock this out this month, and I will take you on the adventure. So I do have a pretty clear idea in my head of how I would like this sweater to look. Basically a drop shoulder V-neck sweater, pretty deep V with contrasting ribbing. So I was looking for other examples just like on Pinterest to see like what do other people do with sweaters like this, and I found out they're called cricket sweaters, cricket like the sport. And I found one example I particularly like, which is the Rag and Bone Talia sweater. I found a couple of other options that I also like, but I haven't been able to figure out what sweater they are. So if I can figure that out, I will put that information on the screen somewhere. But because I have 5 balls of the red, the base of the sweater is going to be red, and then I have basically scraps of a white and a pink that I'm going to use for the ribbon. But I'm going to hop right into it. I need to knit a gauge swatch and do some math and figure out this pattern, but I will see you when I have an update. Okay, so it is the next day and I wanted to show you what I got done last night. So I knit the gauge swatch and did all my math and wrote up a little pattern shockingly fast. Like, it was so much easier this time than the last time that I made my own sweater pattern, mostly because I think I have a better idea of what I'm doing now, and because I think this sweater is kind of easier. Instead of doing like a crazy chicken scratch notebook this time, I just took some notes on my phone. When I'm writing these patterns for myself, it's kind of funny how pared down they are, because it's like body cast on this stitches, knit to this length, split front and back this many stitches, knit front, knit back. Like, it's just as pared down as it can be. And then if I were to turn this into an actual pattern, the amount of exposition that I would need to add. So for this sweater, I am planning on a kind of mid-oversized fit. So this sweater that I'm wearing, I didn't make this, but this is a drop sleeve sweater. It is like fairly fitted with very little ease. And then the sweater that I took a lot of the measurements from, which is the Chika sweater pattern, that is really oversized on me. So I'm kind of splitting the difference and going for positive 6 inches of ease, which means I am knitting this to be 44 inches. I think that's going to be the best look for a kind of like sporty, almost preppy sweater. And with this like super chunky yarn, I feel like when something's knit at quite a large gauge, it's kind of weird to have it like super form fitting. So this I think is going to be a healthy medium, and hopefully it will turn out as I want it to. But what I got done last night was the bottom ribbing, and I have just gotten into the body. So you can see I cast on in the pink, knit that for a little bit, and I did a white stripe, a pink stripe, another white stripe before getting into the body. So now I am just on stockinette body island. Hopefully I can go through this pretty quickly, and I will let you know when I have further updates. So I have just been working away this morning, and I took a look again at my reference photos, and it looks like because the V-neck has so much ribbing, right? So it's like at least an inch and a half or so if it's going to be the exact same as this. Because the V-neck ribbing itself is so thick, the V-neck of like the base of the sweater has to be really low cut for it to be like a little bit it's still a little bit low cut with the ribbing. And I've been looking at my reference photos, and it looks pretty universally that like the bottom of the actual V-neck, where the body stitching ends, not the ribbing, is like well below the armhole opening, which is really annoying for me. Or not annoying, I shouldn't say annoying, it's tedious. So here's what I think I'm going to do. So I have been knitting the body in the round. When I'm knitting in the round, I never put in stitch markers. That's not true. I do put in stitch markers, but I don't put them live where my stitches are. I literally put them in the fabric, and then I'll move them every once in a while. I'll follow that stitch up and I'll move them when I need to. It just helps me like stay in the flow of knitting in the round and not having to stop to like move the stitch marker. Regardless, I have the sides marked on each side so I know how to split the front and the back, and I also have the center front stitch marked. I made a point to have an odd number of stitches on each side so that I had a center stitch, because I'm going to do 1x1 ribbing, so I wanted to make sure that I had one stitch in the very center to have that V-neck have a really sharp V. Hello. Hi. Oh boy. Can you let me wrap up this little bit real quick? Maybe? Keep going, what's going on outside that window? So what I'm thinking I'm gonna have to do is maybe the next round or the round after that, I'm going to put that center stitch just on hold, and I'm gonna start the V-neck decreases. So I'm going to be decreasing each side, which means I need to knit the entire body back and forth until I get to that point where I'm going to split for the armhole opening, which means for at least an inch or so, that is going to be a lot of purling, because, you know, when you're doing the front and back panel, especially on the front, it's just getting less and less and less each time. But because I have the entire body that I'm going to be doing, knitting back and forth, that's gonna be a lot of purling. But I think that's the only way to get the V-neck lower than the armhole. Back again, eh? All right, I'm going to entertain this cat, and I will check back in with you later. Sometimes people will like say to me, oh, like you must knit so fast, you knit so much. I don't knit particularly fast, I just really like watching TV, and I always knit while I'm watching TV. So get you a hobby that can do both. Watch TV while knitting an entire sweater. So I've been trying to practice knitting without looking, like being able to just knit without having to stare at my work the whole time. Weirdly, I find it a lot easier to purl without looking than I do to knit without looking. Like whenever I try to knit and not look at my work, I always miss the stitch, or I only grab like a tiny little bit of it and I split the yarn. But purling, I don't know why, it just like works a lot easier without me having to look. I still have to look like every couple of stitches. I'm not very good at knitting without looking, but I wonder if it's easier for other people too to purl rather than knit without looking. Who would have thought? Lots of progress done this weekend. I got the back panel finished. I am almost done with this first front panel. And funny enough, because I started the V-neck before the armhole opening, I thought that that meant, so I thought because I lowered this, that I would have like a 2 or 3 inches to knit from finishing the decreases, but no, I have like an inch before I do the decreases and then the short rows. I have been like super conscious of my tension as I have been knitting flat because so much of this was knitting around, and I think it's not too shabby, so I'm happy with that. I'm also curious, when you are knitting with non-wool yarns, like wool can felt together, and so that's I usually do just like a spit splice if I am changing skeins while I'm knitting in wool. But because this is cotton, basically every time that I have knit with a non-wool yarn, the join between two different balls has just been very obvious, not looks very nice. So what I've been doing on this is just knitting them together for a few stitches, which kind of separates the ends, which makes it a little bit easier to weave in, but there's no hole. Like, it's just not possible to have a hole. So like these are the couple of stitches, and I don't even think that it looks that obvious. I'm actually feeling much better about this today. I tried this on when I had just the one sleeve or like one shoulder attached and the other side hadn't even been knit yet. And I was so disappointed. I immediately was just like, should I even finish it? Should I bother? But it didn't take me very long to knit this, side front. So I knit the other side front and attach the shoulders. And this is the first time I've tried it on with both shoulders, and I'm feeling a lot better about it. Like, wasn't liking the way that it's laying in the shoulder, and I know that'll change a little bit too. I just feel like I have a white sweater that I knit. It's the same yarn, but obviously it's just knit in white, and I just feel like the drape of that is a lot better, but I need to let that be for a bit because this isn't finished yet and it hasn't been washed, and I know that's going to change things quite a bit, but it just feels a little bit stiff. I'm really, really hoping that that eases out. Having both shoulders on has also pulled it to where it's going to sit, which is good. I wanted to be able to wear this with a high-waisted pair of jeans, and it's something that you can do a little tuck with because it is quite sporty, obviously. So you can do a little bit of a tuck without having too much extra fabric. There's not too much extra fabric in general, which I do like, and I think it'll look really nice with a big, chunky, duplicating this ribbing here at the neckline. I think that's gonna look nice. So that means I have to decide what to do with the sleeves. So sleeves wise, the armhole opening is not really that big. It's not a huge open armscye. So I'm thinking what I'm gonna do is just knit them straight, basically all the way down to my wrist, and then do not a puff sleeve rapid decrease around the wrist. I think I want to do a sharp angular decrease. I think I'm gonna have to draw what I'm thinking for it to make sense. I am just dreading picking up all of these stitches for the neckline, so I do think I'm going to get started on the sleeves first. So this sweater has a similar-ish construction. I mean, the top, obviously, there's a lot of differences, but it's knit in the same yarn at a similar-ish gauge. Obviously, the shape is a little bit different, but that's what I'm talking about. Also, I will say that I am very pleased with the red one that I'm working on. I have made a real point to be super conscious of my tension on the red version. This was one of the first sweaters I ever knit, so I'm not mad about it, but you can definitely see the rowing out in the part that's knit flat as opposed to the part that is knit in the round. Whereas on the red version, I do think I've done a much better job. You know that drawing is not my strong suit, so bear with me on these sleeve options. Okay, so this is the general gist of the body. Pretty boxy, slightly oversized, slightly cropped. So sleeve options, either classic, very slight taper, just gentle tapering down to the wrist, or keep it the exact same width basically throughout, and then just before the wrist, there, do a sharp decrease at an angle, for it's style, right? It's going to be a little poofy, angle, cuff. So I have been working on the sleeve a little bit. It's just about to my elbow, And I'm thinking I'm gonna go back, rip back a little bit and just do the tapered sleeve. I just feel like it's too big, and that by the time I get down to like my wrist where I was thinking about doing the decreases in, that it's just gonna look weird and floppy, and the rest of the sweater like doesn't have enough ease to make that make sense. So plain old tapered sleeves it is. All right, so I finished my first sleeve last night, ended up doing a tapered sleeve. I put markers on all of the decreases because I didn't write them down as I was doing it so that I can make the second sleeve match. And then today, just during my lunchtime, I picked up all of the stitches and started the neckline because I really want to see how the neckline's going to look. And I think that it's gonna be so cute. I'm just looking at it. I will show you a close-up in a second because I am doing like a central double decrease for like the V-neck part of it. And I think it looks really good. I'm very excited. Classic. As soon as I was trying to show you. All right, can you back up? Yeah, I know you don't want to. Okay, so here we go. I picked up along the edges. I think the pickup looks pretty nice, and the decreases. This first one's a little bit wonky, and I think that's just from picking up those stitches here, but I think it's gonna look so good. So I'm replicating the same ribbing all around, whatever's touching the red, right? So working outwards from there. So white, pink, white, and then a bigger section of pink. I did the same thing with the arm ribbing, so that matches. It'll be the same on this. Jackie really wants to sit on it, but it's gonna be so cute. All done. I need to obviously weave in a million ends, and I guess probably give it a good iron because this is cotton. It doesn't really block like wool does, but it fits pretty much exactly like how I wanted it to. I actually kind of like it with this mock neck, turtleneck underneath. But yeah, I am all done. I want to do like a little bit of a wrap up and final thoughts on this sweater project, and I will put some like overlay video to show you the whole thing instead of trying to show you while I'm sitting down. So overall, I'm really happy with how this sweater turned out. This is the second time that I am knitting a sweater without a sweater pattern and like designing my own as I go. And I think it was a lot easier this go around. I think first of all, because I kind of understand the measurements that I want for like the body and the sleeves a little bit better. And also just from having the experience of like, how do I calculate my gauge? How do I turn my gauge into measurements for a sweater? I think just having that previous knowledge made things a lot easier. I didn't really end up changing anything on the fly from what I had originally planned out in my pre-written pattern notes, basically besides lowering the V-neck a little bit, and I'm really glad that I did because the V-neck with the ribbing is pretty high. It's not high cut, but it's definitely higher than I was kind of expecting it to be, which honestly for me makes it a little bit more wearable because a super low cut V-neck is not really like my jam, but I did have to change the construction of the very beginning of the V-neck a little bit from what I had expected. This sweater overall, I think is a little bit of a departure from my typical style of what I would normally choose. I think the main thing is the color of the yarn. Because it is like so red, I wanted to break up that red a little bit by doing the contrasting cuffs, but having the contrasting cuffs and ribbing, I think just makes it much sportier than I tend to wear. It's not at all a bad thing because the college in the town I live, their main color is basically this exact shade of red, and people go bananas for football games and volleyball and basically all the sports, and people are constantly wearing this color red, and I had nothing to wear on game days or anything like that. So now I have something that I can wear and blend in a little bit better. And I think having this be a much like sportier version of a sweater fits with that vibe. Now the main thing that I wanted to talk about in this like wrap up section is the yarn. So I picked this yarn out years ago at the very beginning of like my knitting journey, and before I really knew anything about what kinds of yarns that I like to use. And I don't think that this is a yarn that I would be returning to anytime soon for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it is so heavy. So this is a thicker weight of a cotton yarn. Cotton yarn in and of itself is going to be heavier than like a wool equivalent, even at the same like size of yarn. But because it is a thicker yarn and it's made out of cotton, it is so heavy. And all of that weight plus the fact that it's cotton yarn, and cotton doesn't have the same properties of wool of like memory, so it doesn't snap back into place the same way that wool fibers do. And with all that added weight, it can like encourage the sweater to stretch out a little bit, and it's kind of making it, the fabric's kind of like floppy almost, like there's not a lot of structure to it. And I could have added my own structure by knitting this in pieces and seaming it together, but that's a huge pain and I didn't want to do that. So I knew that I would have to go for a more relaxed fit rather than trying to achieve a sweater with a lot of structure, because this yarn would simply not really vibe with that. That's also part of the reason why I ended up steaming this instead of doing a full wash and block. So if I were to do a full wash and block on this sweater, I feel I would be risking a lot of stretching out that would be harder to mush back into shape to have it dry to the dimensions that I want it to be. So instead, I just laid it out, made sure that like the arms were the same length, that the sides of the body were the same length, got it all pressed out nice and fine, and then steamed it with a hot iron to like set things into place a little bit. But even with that, I steamed and ironed this like maybe 2 hours ago, and it's already pretty wrinkly. Like just from sitting on a chair, the back of the sweater is a little bit wrinkly, so that is slightly disappointing. I also found weaving in the ends on this to be an exercise because the yarn is so soft and slippery, which feels really nice. I thought it was really nice to knit with. It feels really smooth, like the texture of the finished piece is really nice, but because that yarn is so slippery, it made it really hard to weave in the ends to a point where I felt like they were secure. And I really wish that I had left myself a longer tail to work with pretty much throughout the entire thing, just so that I could have an easier time with weaving in the ends. So pattern-wise, I don't really think there's a whole lot that I would change. The only major thing I think that I would change is doing slightly fewer stitches in the pickup for the sleeves. And I'm talking like 2 or 4 fewer stitches per sleeve, just because there's a tiny bit extra fabric as opposed to like how big the armhole is. And so just the very edge and top of the sleeve has slightly puffiness to it. It's not really bad, and I feel like it's one of those like only knitters would notice kind of things, but if I were to have just a tiny bit fewer stitches from the start of the sleeve, I think that would have completely made that not an issue. Overall, I'm really happy with the shape of this sweater. I really like the V-neck. I like how it sits on the body. So if I were to knit this again, I would definitely choose a different yarn just to have something that's a little bit lighter and not quite so drapey as I'm getting with this cotton yarn. I think that it would be really beautiful with like a super woolly wool and knit to like kind of like a longer, almost like tunic-y length. I think that could be really cute. But for now, I am just going to enjoy this sweater as I have it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.